Good evening. My name is Diana Ingram, and I am the Executive Director of Hill Center at the Old Naval Hospital. For those of you who don't know, the physical plant, the Old Naval Hospital, is a Civil War era hospital commissioned by Abraham Lincoln, and in fact, the very first naval hospital in Washington, D.C. Over the past 2 years, we have missed seeing everyone in person and in our beautiful historic building, but we are open, and our wonderful programming team is scheduling cooking classes, author talks, concerts, language programs, and a myriad of classes for our youngest patrons. Please be sure to check out our website and weekly e-blasts for the most up-to-date events. But this evening, we are pleased to present Community Activism, Learning from the Past, Organizing for the Future, under the direction of Claude L. Claude Elliott is a distinguished arts consultant and independent curator. We are particularly proud of the fact that he recently juried Hill Center's 2022 Regional Juried Art Show. The entire show is up on our website, and I encourage you to see it there and to visit it in person. We are open. Mr. Elliott served 6 years as Deputy Director of STEP Africa. Prior to moving to Washington, D.C., he was a program officer with the Rhode Island Foundation, where he managed a fund for the creation of new works and fellowships for visual artists, writers, and music composers. He is a recipient of the DC Commission on Arts and Humanities Fellowship, a curatorial grant, a Humanities DC Vision Grant, and a DC Oral History Collaborative Grant. Mr. Elliott has a Master of Arts in Art History from the University of Mississippi, a Master of Human Services Management from Brandeis University, and a Master of Social Work from Clark Atlanta University. He has served on review panels for the Arts and Humanities Council of Montgomery County, the National Endowment for the Arts Challenge America, the DC Commission on Arts and Humanities, and the Rhode Island Council for the Arts. It is indeed an honor to welcome Claude and his distinguished guests. I'll turn it over to Claude now. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Before we begin, there are a few housekeeping items I'd like to cover. First, this conversation is being recorded and will be available through the Humanities DC Digital Museum. Viewers are muted, but we want your active engagement. Please place your questions in the chat at the bottom of the screen, and there will be a time at the end of the conversation for the panelists to respond to your questions. I would like to thank the Hill Center for hosting this conversation and the Humanities DC for sponsoring the project. I want to acknowledge the technical support from the Hill Center staff, Lisa Olson and Haviland Alta Simonton. I also want to acknowledge our humanities scholar, who is Dr. Kimberly Monroe. She's a scholar of 20th century African American history. She's assistant professor of history and African American studies at Trinity Washington University here in DC. She teaches courses in civil rights movement and women's studies. So in addition to your questions, also please place your comments in the chat. Perhaps something is cited that you have not thought of before, or something inspires you, and we want to hear all about it. These comments will assist Dr. Monroe in her evaluation of the project. I just want to give you a brief background of how this project came to be. The project is inspired by SNCC Legacy Project. SNCC is an acronym for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which was established in 1960 by Shaw University students in Raleigh, North Carolina. From 1960 to about 1968, they developed community leaders and grassroots organizing. They mounted direct action sit-ins to integrate lunch counters, sustain voter registration campaigns, food cooperatives, and independent political parties throughout the South. And I'm going to place their website in the chat, and I really encourage everyone to really explore the SNCC Legacy Project website. So in anticipation of the 5th anniversary of SNCC, several cities, including Washington, D.C., created what is called the Black Power Chronicles. In D.C., from 1916 to 1970, SNCC veterans and community activists held meetings, conducted oral histories, collected photographs, and artifacts that really tell the story of the impact of the Black Power movement on DC. DC has the largest concentration of SNCC. I think it's important to note that SNCC, the Black Power movement, and the Black Panthers were all led by young activists. Most were younger than 25 years of age and really learned on the job. They were trained in the movement. And I was very moved by this, and I began to ask the question, who is now documenting our young activists today? And so based on that, I began to do interviews and with a variety of activists in DC. And the question that kept surfacing time and time again was the issue about the impact of housing policy. The impact of housing policy on DC low and moderate income residents. So I hope this background kind of gives you some context for the project. And now I would like to introduce our moderator, Daniel Del Pilago, who's been organizing with communities of colors for over 15 years, especially around the issue of preserving and improving affordable housing. In his role as organizing director at Empower DC, he supports a variety of organizing and pushing a variety of campaigns. So, and my ongoing conversation with Daniel has always been centered around intentionality. So, Daniel, I want to pass the mic on to you.
Well, thank you, Claude, so much for having me, and good evening to everyone that is attending. I hope you really get something out of what we are going to put here today, because the intention, as Claude mentions, is really for us to figure out how to plug in to the work of undoing wrongs that have existed for quite a long time. As somebody who's done this work for 15 years, which is a small period of time in consideration to the giants whose shoulders we stand on, that Claude mentioned, what I've seen is that housing policy in the district, in this country, really, you know, I like to make it very simple, is a symptom of the racist ethos that this country was founded on. And we're going to be touching on a lot of these kind of issues. I'm not trying to hurt anybody's feelings or anything like that, but we do have to touch on these issues in order to undo them. I'm originally from Peru. I'm a Spanish speaker, and there's a great term that's called a desalambrar. And that translates to literally like undoing wires, right? But the wires that we're trying to do is systemic racism that spills over into almost every aspect of life here that affects Black people, people of color, low-income folks, non-dominant culture people in the city and around the country. I want to. I don't want to spend too much time talking about this. I do want to point folks towards a great resource, Mapping Segregation DC, which Mapping Displacement DC, which really does a great job of telling the story of what did that look like. What did housing policy look like here in the district that you know, kept certain people in certain neighborhoods, did not allow certain people to buy homes. There was some great information there about racial covenants, where not only the local governments had a role in instituting racial covenants around, not allowing primarily Black folks, at times Jewish folks, from buying homes, from moving into certain neighborhoods, and how it was upheld by the Supreme Court, as well as how the white citizenry here, took it upon themselves and used their power, their social power, to continue a system that often pushed Black people out or kept them out of the neighborhoods. But with that said, I want to get into our discussion here and talk really about some of what we've seen here in the district, how we continue to see this policy, that is hidden oftentimes and made to sound really great. Oftentimes we hear of many new programs that sound great, the New Communities Initiative, which we'll unpack a little bit in the future. Excuse me, in the future of this meeting. But at the end of the day, they are really other levers to create displacement. We hear, we've been dealing and hearing with the word gentrification for quite a while now. Oftentimes it is made to seem like it's some kind of natural occurrence where, the coffee shops show up, the artists move in, and it attracts new people. But in fact, this is all backed by actual government policy. So we'll get into that. I'd like to introduce our panelists. And before we get into the meat of the conversation, I really want to ask them, what got them into this work and what keeps them doing this work, because I think that is why we invited them to be on this evening, because it's not folks that have only, not have they only done this work, but they continue to do this work. So I'd like to ask Linda Leeks if she would set us off here with an introduction of herself. And, why do you continue to do this work, Linda? I'll be very forthcoming and honest. I exist, or I continue to exist because of Linda. I work with the organization that she helped found. I lived in a cooperative that she also helped find. So I just want to say thank you, and I love you, Linda. And with that said, if you would talk to us, what brought you to this work and what keeps you engaged in this work?
Thank you, Daniel. And okay. Thank you for the invite. And let me just say really quick and briefly, my cooperative where I live is called the Ella Jo Baker Intentional Community. And as was mentioned in the very beginning of this program, SNCC, well, it was Miss Ella Jo Baker that organized SNCC, that trained the SNCC, and make sure that they fought for justice. And so that is what my cooperative is named after, Ella Jo Baker. But let me say thank you for the invitation to be a part of this program. And I've been out here organizing for housing justice for a very long time. And I don't see any reason to stop. Of course, I have slowed down. The older you get, the slower you get. But at any rate, thank you for having me on this panel. And I will talk a little bit more about the work that I've been involved in.
Wonderful. Thank you, Linda. Gabrielle Newell is also on the panel. Gabrielle is doing some great work in Ward 1, following in the footsteps of Linda to a large extent, in the sense that she's working to create a co-op, Baldwin co-op. Talk to us a little bit, Gabrielle, about what brings you to this work and what keeps you continuing to do this work, because it's not easy work.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. Really good to be here and to learn from you all. Linda and Elliott Baker Intentional Community have been mentors for Baldwin House Community Collective, which is a new cooperative we're starting in Ward 1. So I'm looking forward to getting to continue to learn in this space. As Daniel said, my name is Gabrielle Newell, and I grew up in DC. To be specific, I grew up in Chevy Chase, DC, which some of you may know is a very well-resourced, we'll say, neighborhood, both with public resources and also private. I grew up in a big brick house that my mother bought about 20 years ago. And when we moved in, we were the only Black family in the neighborhood, and we were very aware of that. My mom is a dentist, makes good money, but she bought this house at the early part of her career, and she was able to do that because of the support of my great-grandmother. And here, I just want to take a few minutes to introduce you to someone really important. So this is my great-grandmother. This is my Gigi, holding me, and she's got a story that is important. I think through her story, looking back at the past to understand the future, I think it's looking at my family story that I understand what racialized capitalism means. So we're going to get to that. But this is my great-grandma. This is my Gigi. She worked as a nursing assistant for all of her life. She worked at the same hospital for 50 years, and she worked up to the year that she died in her mid-80s, which was just a few years ago. And she was one of 6 children. She had a twin sister. This is my Aunt Shirley. My Aunt Shirley was the cool, the wild one. And what's important to recognize here is that they were twins, so same parents, but they were read differently racially. My Aunt Shirley is darker in complexion than my great-grandmother, and that meant that they had very different experiences growing up, even though they were twins. And I'll say that my great-grandmother, here they are together. So that's my great-grandmother on the right side and my Aunt Shirley on the left, again, twins. My great-grandmother was a hardworking lady, and also she was the lightest one in the family. She was able to get jobs that none of her other siblings could get. She was able to get access and to operate in white spaces. And as a result, she became kind of the breadwinner of the entire extended family because of her ability to get access. And this is what I mean by racialized capitalism. This is when race influences your ability to operate in the economy, the opportunities that you have. When we use race to order society. And what that means for me today, and here I'll stop sharing my screen, but what that means for me today is that I continue to benefit from this inherited privilege of having my great-grandmother help my mother buy this big, beautiful house in Chevy Chase, DC. It meant that when I moved home from school in 2016, and I got myself, that good government job and started making pretty good money, it meant that I was able to put that money into savings instead of paying off debt. And it meant that I was able to buy a condo. And so what that means today, 5 years after, I bought my condo, is that my expenses have remained the same. They are fixed. And looking ahead 25 years, as I pay off my condo, my expenses will continue to stay the same. My ability to stay in DC is looking pretty strong. But the same cannot be said of people who are renting in DC. We know that rental prices are going up. And in my case, I get to stay, my prices stay the same, and I'm building equity. So half the money I put in each month, I'm going to get back when I sell. Again, not the same for people who are renting. So that's why I'm in this fight. That's why I'm in this battle to create some fair housing in DC, because that to me doesn't seem quite fair. It seems kind of ridiculous. So I'm involved in Ward 1 Mutual Aid, which is a group of neighbors coming together to pool resources so that we can all survive this pandemic and continue to thrive in Ward 1. So we believe in non-hierarchical organizing in the spirit of Elliott Baker. We believe, as she said, that strong communities don't need strong leaders. So we organize together. And coming out of this effort, we started building Baldwin House Community Collective, named after James Baldwin. And this will be a tenant-owned building. So I'm here, I've been doing a whole lot of fundraising, again, because of my inherited privilege, to buy an apartment building in Ward 1 using the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, and to convert it into a limited equity cooperative that will be tenant owned and will also become a hub for Ward 1 Mutual Aid organizing and worker owned cooperatives. So happy to share more about that, but I'll close out there.
Thank you, Gabrielle. And just to underscore the point of, I think that's part of what we hope to inspire, or what folks are inspired from the talk this evening, is that people doing their part to undo the wrongs that exist in this city and in the country. story. So thank you, Gabrielle. Next, I'd like to introduce Awad Bilal. He is a tenant organizer with the Latino Economic Development. Now, I worked with them many years ago, and they used to be the Latino Economic Development Corporation. I always mess it up, so I will let Awad correctly introduce the organization that he works with. But thank you, Awad. If you would tell us a little bit about what brought you to this work and what keeps you doing this work.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Danielle. My name is Awad Bilal, and I am a tenant organizer with the Latino Economic Development Center, a nonprofit here in Columbia Heights, DC, that is focused on empowering tenants, lower class and working class tenants in the city to know their rights. I am a DC native. I'm from here. I wasn't born here, but I grew up in Ward 4. And I spent the majority of my time up until around 2007 in DC. And then I came back to the city in 2018 to what I would consider a radically different city in terms of demographics, in terms of opportunities, and in terms of rent prices and buildings that have gone up, and just where you see where the money has gone. And I noticed how neglected lower class and working class Black and brown people in the city have remained, while this newer influx of demographic, we'll leave them however you want to describe them, become more catered to by the government, by systemic processes, by all kinds of situations that help aid displacement and aid the taking of affordable housing from people in the city. The reason why I am still in this job and why I am interested in pursuing organizing and where my activism is based is because of the work of women like Elliott Baker and Fannie Lou Hamer and Linda Leaks, who are local legends that have laid the groundwork for all of the upward mobility that tenants in this city have and have access to that a lot of people don't know about. And so every chance that I get speaking with tenants to help advocate for or escalate or just build power collectively is it's a chance at hope, actually. And so I find a lot of what we do extremely relevant and necessary, and every day is a learning experience, but lived experience is really the basis of why I'm in this. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this panel. I'm excited to share more.
Thank you, Awad, and thank you for lifting up hope in this work. You know, oftentimes it's incremental. Victories are incremental, but I think it is our job to carry on that tradition of lifting up hope, creating hope for others to become engaged and to continue with the work. So thank you for lifting that up. Linda, as somebody who has been doing this work for a good amount of time in the district, how have you seen policy, actual government policy used to displace longtime Black DC residents, out of the district? As I mentioned, there is policy, governmental policy that is used, as the city plans what they want the city to look like and who they want to be here. You've seen quite a bit of this. So if you could share with the audience, how have you seen that work?
Yeah, what I've seen happen and organized around is, developers are from other countries like Germany, like France, and they own a lot of the property where our folks live, where low and moderate income people live. And when a particular neighborhood starts to change, then they come in and their whole thing is to push the people out so that they can make a lot of money. And so my history of organizing have been to organize people to speak up for themselves and fight for themselves. That's what I see an organizer's job is, to teach people how to speak up for themselves. And that's what I'm happy to say, many of the properties that I spent a lot of time organizing in Columbia Heights. The folks are still there. You know, I go and check on them regularly, but it took a lot of work and it took a lot of effort because a lot of the folks that were involved in changing some of the laws or preventing the laws that preserve housing for low and moderate income people, you know, from being changed by certain lawmakers. Well, the people, I would teach them how to raise their voices and how to recall, if need be, those council people who were not working in their interests. That was one of the things. We used to, when we would take people, when some of our residents will go to council meetings, council hearings, they would take their recall petition with them. And as they testify, they will make sure that the council people would know what that petition is all about. So that was part of them having power, because that's what the issue is all about, power. You know, who have the power? So if residents don't have the power to speak up for themselves and make a difference, then they'll get forced out. So I feel really good that I think it's about 9 or 10 of the properties that I worked in are still in Columbia Heights. They are cooperatives, which is great because that gives residents an opportunity to collectively own their property. And that have always been my primary focus, is to create cooperatives so that people can have a say and they can be in charge of their housing. I don't know if that makes sense, but
no, thank you. I think, you know, one of the prime factors, and Gabrielle brought this up, is, you know, I think the work that you've done has really helped to shift the values of how we see housing, right? Housing is a commodity. People want to make money, as much money as they can from it. And that includes taking land and displacing whoever is on it.
That's
right.
right.
I think what your work has done, and which I've benefited from, is creating housing for housing's sake, in the sense that people need a place to live, people need low cost, low barrier housing that they can create together. So thank you for that. And I'll share a quick little story that always sticks with me with Linda about challenging power. And it was just a small way that you did it. I don't even know if you remember, Linda, when I was, cutting my teeth, as they say, in this work, we were doing council visits and around the budget, around housing issues. And we went to Mary Che's office with a bunch of folks, and she sat down and, you know, she was trying to kind of, you know, she was in power. It's her office. She's the council member. And she was drinking she pops open a soda and she starts drinking her soda. And Linda said, "Oh, you got one for each of us?" And that just changed the dynamic. Mary Che was like, "What?" You know, it was just to me, it was so amazing, the pressure that you put on her through that simple little act. So thank you for that. I'll always remember that. Awad, as a person who is currently organizing with tenants in the district around many issues, can you talk to us about, you know, what are the policies that you both use, but also, you know, recognize that are still at play that keep pushing people out of the city?
Absolutely. Well, I work primarily with helping tenants understand their TOPA rights and understand how to exercise their TOPA rights, which is an extremely complicated process just on its own. But what I like to believe is with our help, it can be accessible, and just helping people understand exactly what your stake is in this and what you have access to. A lot of time, people don't put a lot of value on where when I say people, I mean the government. I've seen different types of outcomes based off of where in the city people are, for the kinds of buyouts that they're getting in terms of like from affordable housing developers who are supposed to help protect affordable housing, and then market rate developers who are looking just to flip the unit to make the buck and get rid of affordable housing in a neighborhood. It has been eye-opening for me to see how few people are still protected. I work with the Excluded Workers Coalition, which helps represent people who were unable to get resources from the government, specifically regarding like stimulus payments that went out over the past pandemic and different types of resources and assistance that undocumented workers or returning citizens just didn't have access to. And I'm seeing how neglected they are and how much of a struggle it has been and how common it comes up and how frequently you see people who were just left out and they haven't had anyone to advocate for them. And it's been an uphill battle and it feels arduous, constantly coming up against the same type of language barriers, the same type of economic access that is just limited, people who feel like they don't have a chance. And so they're easier to take any type of buyout or any type of out to leave the city and go elsewhere. But that just flips another unit to become able to be served to that demographic that I was talking about earlier. And it's like the entire reason I do my job is to help preserve every unit of affordable housing that we still have in the city. And sorry, I don't know if that specifically answers your question, but it's very specific about something that I'm going through right now or that we're living through. And the pandemic hasn't helped. And so like not having, for instance, the eviction moratorium was lifted on December 31st, and that was awful. And you know, rent increases can happen again, and that is absolutely awful because people's wages haven't gone up and jobs aren't more available. And you're realizing that people are in a lot of the same situations they were in March 2020, and the government doesn't have support for them. And the mayor isn't providing support for a lot of residents who feel left out. And it's frustrating. It's absolutely frustrating.
No, thank you. If you could just unpack TOPA right quick. What does TOPA mean?
Absolutely. TOPA is the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. And it is something that we've had in place since about 1979, after the giant condo boom that happened in DC, where a lot of Black and brown residents were being displaced and felt like they had no options. And so it gives tenants the first option.
Oh, I think you muted yourself.
Oh, sorry. It gives tenants the option to purchase their building when a landlord is selling. They get the first right of purchase. They get the first option to choose a contract purchaser. They can form limited equity co-ops like Gabrielle and Linda have been doing, and they can also help convert it to condos, which granted is not affordable housing, but still. It provides a number of options that give equity to tenants. Well, not necessarily equity, but just it gives them power. Yeah.
That's right. I think once again, it's a tool, as Linda spoke of, to shift the power dynamic. Oftentimes, residents feel like, it's going up for sale. That's it. I better find, there's a lot of cases of self-eviction, buildings just going away because people didn't know their rights. And the district has some very strong and some very good tenant rights. However, as Awad alluded to, there are people who will, try to buy your rights from you, and not at a price that really matches the power that you have if you hold on to it. And oftentimes, we've seen situations where owners will try to totally go around the process and find ways, sell 99% of the building and keep 1% so they don't have to offer it to tenants. So the work that Awad is doing is very important because, it's an often said phrase, but knowledge is power. The more people know, the more they are able to use that knowledge and apply it to do something that really benefits them. And I think that's much of this work is, there are options. This country, the system makes you believe that, what you get is what you get. but there are different ways of doing things. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing, Awad. So thank you. Gabrielle, you are engaged in a battle right now, and I call it a battle because that's what it is. It is very tough to go through this process of purchasing your own property, and then of course creating something that is able to be around for a long time, that's sustainable. Talk to us about the work going on with Baldwin House, where you guys are, what's going on.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think you named it. The goal with Baldwin House is to create permanent affordable housing that would be owned by the tenants. So then they would be the ones to determine the monthly payments. Where we are now, Ward 1 Mutual Aid started 2 years ago, and the goal was to equip us all with a belief and confidence in the practice of mutual aid. So if we pool resources, we can build power and we can create something beautiful. And throughout all of that, we are educating ourselves about the different efforts we could learn from. So early on, we connected with Elliott Baker Intentional Community. And so many of us were like, yes, one day we want that. And an opportunity came. An organizer with Ward 1 Mutual Aid, also they're involved in Stop Police Terror Project. Their name is Natasha Napper, very talented, very dedicated organizer. They learned that their building was going for sale, and we saw this as an opportunity. So we mobilized very quickly to activate the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. The tenants formed a tenant association, and they decided that they would work with a new effort that we started for this building, Baldwin House Community Collective, in order to buy their building. What's been shocking to me is that even though seen as a leader in the country as far as the existence of the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, and on paper the process seems so clear, what's wild to me is just the amount of money that you need in order to move through the process. So we're seeking financing from lenders who share some social responsibility. We've been blessed with a lot of volunteer labor, volunteer accountant, volunteer lawyer, lots of mentors guiding us through this process. And still, we need to come up with a huge amount of money for the down payment. And that's why I'm in this effort to do a lot of fundraising. I believe in the refrain of Southerners on New Ground, which is a powerful organizing group that we, the invitation is to give of our time, our talents, and our tithe, as in our money. And so we bring that to our organizing. But what is just wild to me is that not only, do you need to have, a strong social support system that's going to guide you through the TOPA process. And thankfully, there are powerful organizations like LEDC that exist to do that. But also, you got to come up with a lot of private money. And I'm just wondering how that's supposed to work in practice.
No, thank you for that. I mean, once again, I think to me, we not only have to hold on to what we have, but we got to make sure that it is permanent, that it is long-term. I remember when I lived in the co-op that Linda helped to found, very often, we'd get flyers, calls. Are you guys ready to sell? Do you guys want this? And they want it. They see the dollar signs of where the co-op is and how much money can be made from it. In fact, before I left, and to me, this is really an example of what's happening in the city, or what's happened in this city. Right next to one of our main buildings, a condo project went up called Ivory Towers. And if that isn't telling of what is happening in the city, I don't know what is. Ivory Towers right next to Elliott Baker Intentional Community Co-op. So we are, unfortunately, I don't want to rush us through this process because we do have some time, but I also want to respect folks' time. I think we've been talking about what we've seen and what we're up against, but our job is to inspire folks to take action, to have hope, to believe that they can change this system that's been set up to oppress them, at the very least to keep them from being their full selves. Talk to us, especially we find ourselves now in the budget season in the district. We are in an election year. We're seeing some change in the city council. As I mentioned, Ms. Che a little earlier, she's going to be off the council. So we're going to see, quite a change in at least some faces on the city council, and potentially the mayor. I don't know about that, though, but we can hope. But we'll see. Talk to us about what you all think are the important issues. And I think for, Gabrielle, it'll be obvious that, you're going to continue working on the project you're working on. But, if each of you could talk to us a little bit, what are the issues that you feel really need some attention right now? Linda, do you want to start us off, or Awad? Go ahead.
I don't mind jumping right into it. For me, I think one of the main things that people can help push for, if you're a DC resident, is asking your council member to just help fully fund housing and to put surplus budget money back into housing, whether that's fully funding ERAP or reinstating state EC, or helping to fund, like the Excluded Workers Coalition that I was talking about earlier, which helps redirect funds to undocumented people and returning citizens who just, once again, did not have access to the funds that everyone else got over the pandemic that other residents received. Just any attention that is brought towards helping to preserve and build affordable housing in the city and what that looks like, because even at the base CPI right now, what they consider affordable housing is anything but in DC and Washington, DC, because of the demographic change. And so what you have is working class families, lower class people who either they are still on the waiting list for a voucher. You have to understand that it has been closed for, I believe, over 10 years. That list for subsidized housing has been closed for over 10 years. There's about 40,000 people who are waiting on that list in DC since 2013. Any type of priority given to helping to move that number and house these people, house these residents who have been waiting, that should be more of a priority as opposed to any type of further development. It's disgusting that we have so many cranes in the city for all this new development that is not, I don't know, being redirected towards the people who need it the most.
Can I just say one thing?
Please.
Yeah, I just want to say, from what I'm seeing, it is critical that residents who are directly impacted by the housing crisis issue are the ones that should be organized so that they can speak up and speak out. That's how change get made. Yes, I have, during my organizing period, I have organized busloads of residents to go to council members' homes and demonstrate from Ward 2 to Ward 5, busload. That's because we have to have the people who are directly impacted by the housing issue have to be involved and have power. In fact, they need to have the power to elect the people that will stand in on our behalf, on their behalf, or elect or remove those folks who are working against us and working on somebody else's behalf, working on the money behalf. So that's just that's one of the things that I want to say. And let me just say one other little quick thing in terms of organizing. I have had the situation where in organizing residents and tenants and them getting a little power, I've had the experience of landlords paying people to come in to those organizations and create, dissension inside. Excuse me. We have to be conscious of that when we are working to organize people to have power. So for me, power is critical. That's how decisions get made.
Right. No, thank you for reminding us. That is at the center of all of this, is creating power, shifting the power imbalance that exists. Gabrielle, you know, I mentioned that you are working on a very specific project now, but in general, you know, I think that that very specific project is shaped by other policy, other issues that need attention. Any thoughts on what are some of the critical issues you all will be looking at as you move through this work?
Yeah, well, one thing that we're committed to mutual aid is about creating systems where we all pool resources in order to survive. And so what we're learning from as we deepen our efforts is, what does it look like to have an ecosystem where cooperatives have a chance? And from that, I'm here taking notes from what Awad and Linda have to say, because with Ward 1 Mutual Aid, we do have a strong base of people involved. And so we're primed to use all the levers available to us to not just make this one project happen, but to create an ecosystem where cooperatives can survive. And so here's the invitation. We're looking for direction as to what we should be mobilizing around. And there's some really powerful organization or questions in the chat about the role of policing. I wonder if I can go there when thinking about the ecosystem that enables cooperatives to survive. I think we know that policing has been used both by landlords, but also by state institutions to suppress organizing. A powerful effort that you know, I continue to be inspired by in Ward 1 is the Vendedores Unidos, the union, the collective of street vendors, and they've successfully organized to lessen the presence of police on 14th Street near Columbia Heights Metro, where they do their work, where they sell their food. And they're partners in this effort, hopefully, you know, potentially future tenant owners of Baldwin House, some of them. But I think Rashid in the chat is right that when thinking about the ecosystem that enables cooperative to survive, enables organizing, we do need to think about the role of policing in that as well.
Thank you for that. Yes, and as we begin to wrap up, Claude, I just checking in. Would you like to lead us through the questions in the chat? I think we are at a good point to transition to questions. Would you like me to handle that?
No, Kimberly will handle that.
Wonderful, Kimberly, please go right ahead.
Yes, good evening, everyone. I've thoroughly enjoyed each of the panelists' remarks. I'm definitely over here taking notes and learning as well. But as Gabrielle said, we do have some very powerful questions within the chat. The first one is from Robert, where he says, are you looking at ways of using American Rescue Plan local funds to support your efforts, and wondering how folks are trying to use those funds for housing? I don't know which panelist wants to tackle that one. Awad or?
I can chime in really quick. In my experience, we are not using American Rescue Plan funds. However, I want to kind of piggyback off of something Gabrielle said earlier about in the TOPA process. If you are, for instance, on this chat and you're in DC and you are faced with beginning to go through the process, forming that limited equity co-op, you do not, as a tenant, need to have that money to actually make that limited equity co-op happen. Basically, there's a way to fund it through the city, depending on income studies that you can do in your building. There is funds available to help you actually like close it. There are multiple different nonprofit agencies similar to LEDC that can help you walk you through that stage in the organizing that happens around TOPA. To piggyback to the question though, we have not used ARP local funds to specifically redirect that to housing. So no.
Yeah, I don't think we've seen how that is trickling down into the district's budget and how it's applied to, for example, the Housing Production Trust Fund or anything. So something we should keep an eye on though.
Thank you. And the next question from Cynthia, how can one help if not a DC resident? I think that's a critical question.
Many different ways. If I can repeat the same refrain that guides me, we invite you to give of your time, your talents, and your tithe. I'll post some links for ways that you can support Ward 1 Mutual Aid is what I'll share. I'm in Baldwin House directly. We're also seeking mentors, and we're seeking people with different areas of technical expertise. We're seeking a fiscal sponsor. We're seeking someone who will sort of help us come on as a partner as we renovate this building and take a fair fee. We're seeking people to join me in fundraising. So there's lots of different ways to get involved. And one thing I'll offer is that throughout this, continuing to educate ourselves is key. So we have a really active newsletter. The recent one celebrated the Elliott Baker intentional community and some of the work of Elliott Baker. So if you want to continue to learn alongside us in that way, we do host events to continue sort of building and dreaming about what we're building. So I invite you to join the Baldwin House email list as well.
Just to underscore, join an organization. I mean, I think that's part of all of this work, is realizing that, we can be activists, we can, raise our voices and make a lot of noise, but it all has to be done through organization. And there's, a great amount of organizations carrying on this work. So yes, definitely join an organization.
So the next question, I believe, Gabrielle, you already touched on. What effect has the institution of policing had on the displacement of DC residents? And we know DC is the most policed area, probably, especially in the United States. So I'll move to the next one, unless any panelists wanted to have additional remarks to add to the state of policing. Okay, Karen said, how much support do you get from predominantly white organizations? And how helpful would it be if large numbers of middle and upper class white people lobbied for these issues? Any panelists? Linda, Daniel, talking about predominantly white organizations, the allies help in this work.
I'll say, that is that's a great question and needed, because I think what we are trying to undo is the philosophy of white supremacy. So I think white folks need to take the lead on that and undo that, and support the building that communities of color, Black folks in this city, in this country, are trying to do. With that said, I think, there's like great organizations like Surge in DC showing up for racial justice, that, pools their resources to support Black-led organizations, people of color-led organizations, and really letting them lead the way in the change that they want to create, and support in a myriad of ways. So, I would encourage you to maybe check out Surge and the way they've formulated as a good example. Awad, I think you had something to add.
I was going to say, I don't know if it's a predominantly white institution, but I do know that LEDC gets funds from Catholic charities, and we love that. But outside of it, I want to second what you said about supporting Black and brown women-led collectives that are doing a lot of the organizing in the city, and that have actually organized a lot of the more successful campaigns in the city. Put your money into that. It's something that we can always say. What did Gabrielle say? Your time, your tithes.
And your talents.
And your talents, exactly. Yes, absolutely. I want to implore white allies with resources to just go ahead and redirect that to these coalitions and to those Black and brown women-led coalitions. And there's no shortage of those in DC, absolutely.
I'm not seeing any additional questions in the chat. I don't know if there was someone who raised a hand at all during the program, but if not, I'll turn it back over to Daniel or Claude. I'm not sure which direction we're going, but I don't see any additional questions.
Yeah, maybe if I could just wrap up in the sense of just asking for any last word from the panelists. We never have enough time to really get at this huge discussion that we need to have, but I think that's the added value of this event is that we're creating this space to have more of these discussions and then encourage folks to take action. So as we close, any closing words from the panelists? Linda, you want to lead us?
Yes, I just want to say thank you, number one, for inviting me. And number two, I want to say thank you for having this panel and this discussion, because it is so critical that people understand what is going on and know what people have accomplished so that they won't lose it. And we don't have to keep going back and back and back. Because I'm looking, I was out there in the 70s, and here we are in 2000 and something, still fighting the same battle. No, listen. So let me say thank you for those of you who are out there saying, let's end it. Let's make sure that equity, that justice is for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Gabrielle?
I appreciate that entirely. And I'll say, by looking at what's been done, for me, it's a source of inspiration. It's encouraging to know that we're a part of a legacy. I look again at the Elliott Baker Intentional Community, and last I heard, a 1-bedroom apartment in the Elliott Baker Intentional Community goes for the 800s compared to 1400s market rate. So just to see the tangible benefits of what organizing can produce, and to get to be in relationship with those who built it and learn, okay, how do we get that? I think that's both energizing and also tactically, it feels really important.
Thank you. Awad, any last thought?
I mean, my last thoughts are, once again, upholding the shoulders that I stand on. I am so grateful to the organizing that activists and organizers like Linda and like Benito and all these important tenants of the city who laid the groundwork for the work that I'm doing now. You can't underestimate how much they got done that I'm still carrying on now. This TOPA work, this empowerment that happens between each other, like we really do have the power. People have power and tenants have power, and helping people recognize that and act on it is the key that's going to get us through all this. And I think holding on to it is going to guide us.
Thank you so much. Claude?
Yes. So to kind of bring it to a close, I want to underscore the need for everybody to become involved in issues in the community, to be engaged in activism. We talked about that. We talked about the opportunities. On the screen, I have put up, for those who are actively involved in community organizing and are community activists, especially if you belong to an organization, there are several foundations. This is kind of the time where foundations are willing to support social justice movements. So I put my email in the chat. If anyone's interested in receiving this list, I will respond to your email. But I wanted to point out some local foundations. So in addition to Humanities DC, the Greater Washington Community Foundation is doing some major work in terms of social justice issues and really giving support to BIPOC communities. So I wanted for you to have that list and begin to, I think the main thing to keep about foundations is that it's a long process between when a grant is submitted, when it's reviewed, and when the money is awarded. So it's good to become familiar with some of these foundations, to begin to have some conversations with them. And so that next year, you will be ready to submit an idea for a proposal. Some foundations are willing to at least sit down with you and talk about your idea. There's some foundations that really are only asking for what they call a LOI, a letter of intent, where they want you to share your idea, and they will make a determination if it's within their priorities. I wanted to point out some interesting small founders like the Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream. They have a foundation. They're small grants, but they're very much interested in making social change. So I think for those of you who have been looking for some kind of support from foundations who are consistent with your mission and your goals and your target population, there is some money out there. I feel that it would be helpful for you to at least know that there is there. And also for activist artists, the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities is another place to look at. So my email is in the chat. Just email me and tell me you like a list of the foundations, and I'll make sure you get that. I think in closing, I really want to thank Gabrielle Newell, Linda Leaks, Awad Bilal, and Daniel D. Pilago, Kimberly Monroe, for all of your hard work and discussions we've had to really bring this conversation to life. I'm hoping, my goal is that this is just the beginning of a series of community conversations. I'm hoping that people are inspired by the possibility of doing this and really begin to talk, not only within yourself, but with other organizations, other groups, especially with younger activists. And I want to end with the plea that I'm continuing to interview activists. I think it's really important that your voice is heard, that you become part of history. And if you're interested in being interviewed, just email me and I will get back to you with the details. So thank you very much. I want to thank all the viewers for their participation and for their questions. And Daniel, thank you very much. You did a great job. Everyone on the panel was recommended to me. I didn't know anyone. And I'm really pleased with this project, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Claude.